been in the industry since 2001, and he currently works at Amazon as a senior engineer for the Alexa platform. He's also a host of the Soft Skills podcast, and he's a very cool guy. Really looking forward to getting to know him. So please join me in welcoming David Smith.
Hey, welcome to the show, Dave. Thanks for making time. David, is it okay, Dave? I get lazy sometimes.
Yeah, Dave's good.
Or do you prefer David? I'll go with David.
No, Dave's good.
You're good?
That's what most people call
Okay.
My dad's name is
I know some people that are very specific about that.
Yeah.
My dad's name is actually David Smith. My middle
No
name
way.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, my middle name's David. And so it's like throughout my high school years, I got called David a lot.
Yeah.
It's just funny. Let's talk.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how this came about. So as many people know, we've been talking about a lot about this new studio that we've got downtown. And so that means Mike's in town. Mike used to drive in to do the show all the time, but now because we've got the studio, he's doing the show here. And as a result, he started attending local events and things like that. And if I understand it right, that's how you met Dave, right? Was it a local event?
I went to it's called a Utah JS meetup, and that's Utah JavaScript, and they do them 2 or 3 times a month. And you were there doing like fake interviews.
No.
Not fake, but
So what I did that night was I offered a free career consultation service.
Yeah, sorry, I'm pointing. For people watching, I'm pointing, but they can't hear anything because we don't have the sound card hooked up.
Oh, no, that makes sense.
So if you just want to hand me that plug in,
right.
I'll start speeding the audio. So everybody right now is
here.
listening to the deaf version of the show, the silent version. We're harkening back to an earlier era.
Yeah.
So sorry. I mean, we explained to Dave before this. This is like our second live stream. So we're new to the whole game.
And you know, the sad part is I'm gonna have to walk outside now and turn the volume up on this end.
Really, you can't do it from that volume?
No, because it's controlled with the mixer.
Come on.
So, anyways,
Mikey,
let's get back to the. You know what?
See, we're serious professionals.
It's not live streaming yet. I'm gonna edit this out just so I'm just saying.
It actually is live streaming.
Anyways, where were we?
So we were talking about how this all came to be, where you met Dave, and how we wound up doing this show.
The Utah JS meetup, and you were doing interviews.
No, yeah. So you say.
Ignore.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I had this idea that people in the software engineering industry would like to have some time to like share with someone else their career-related challenges or questions from someone who's been around for a little while. So I offered up that service to Utah JS, where I said, hey, let me come in and offer to 3 or 4 people, spend half an hour with them in one-on-one sessions and just talk about their career and their goals and challenges, and see if I could offer some free consultation, just as a way to give back to the software development community a little bit. I was very surprised that, I had 3 slots that I sent out. We had like 15 people reply and say, I want to use one of those slots. I managed to talk with 4 people that night, which was great. It was a lot of fun. I got to share some good info with people who are pretty new to the industry, and I think it was great. So it wasn't really interviewing. We did talk, some of the topics that came up did have to do with like preparation for interviews, changing jobs, things like that. But
I walked in a little late that night, but the theme of the night seemed to be like the hiring process for someone who's getting their feet in the door. And I'm that guy. I'm at the level right now where on my LinkedIn page it says front-end developer, but I don't even know if I'm technically qualified to say that. I think I am. Maybe I'll have to look at my work afterwards, and if I'm not, I'll pull it down. But I've been working on a project for the last, 2.5, 3 years, and I started out just self-teaching myself in coffee shops for 3 or 4 hours a day. I did like lynda.com, and eventually I moved over to Team Treehouse. And we had the CEO of Treehouse on our show about 2-3 months ago, Ryan Carson. And he's a really awesome guy. It just was a really cool experience. And just over the last 2.5 years, I taught myself a little PHP, a little JavaScript. The app I'm working on is in Bootstrap and React and Node.js. and I'm slowly starting to figure everything out. And I really appreciate the meetups like Utah JS and the willingness of people to come out and share and teach stuff like that. Because for someone like me who is self-taught, doesn't want to go through school and pay another 40 grand to get an education, it really helps out a lot, because you start developing that network of connections and people that you know in the industry. So if you have a question or get stumped with something, you can reach out and hopefully get a little help.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that stuff is beneficial even if you did shell out the 40 grand and got a degree. I mean, people still get stuck, people still need help, and these meetups are fantastic regardless of your background, I think.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Props for being willing to go out.
Well, and it's one thing I'll say about the community in Salt Lake in general, and I don't have a lot of experience in, like, you know, the developer crowd or whatever outside of Salt Lake, but it seems like people in this area are really giving of their time and themselves. And these communities, I mean, I do more of these in the creative space or in the business space, but I mean, people are just so quick to give of themselves and share their expertise in this area. And I think it's really refreshing. It actually changed sort of my perception of Salt Lake early on when we just moved here. I had been doing a lot of work in Boise. Actually, we were talking about moving to Boise on the day I took a job down here in Salt Lake. And one of the things I did when I moved into the advertising industry here in Salt Lake is I, you know, got involved with the local groups and things like that. And I had proposed this idea of doing this thing called a agency crawl. And basically we did one in Boise, and it was an awesome thing. Like, they put all the creatives on school buses and they drove around from agency to agency, and you did a little agency tours. It was really cool. And, you know, everybody could have a beer or whatever. And it was this fun little thing, right?
School buses full of creative people.
Full buses full of creatives.
Right?
Yeah, no, luckily we all made it out alive. But it was really cool. Great experience. And in Boise, the community of the agencies was really, like, tight and brotherly. Like, even though they were all, you know, it's a small community relatively, and they're all fighting for the same work, more or less, they still were doors wide open, everybody welcome. And so it was a really cool experience for me. So I brought that idea to it was the Utah Ad Fed at the time here in Salt Lake. And we tried the same idea, and we got one of these cool open air buses, and we got all the creatives, you know, to come to these events. But as we were going agency to agency, people couldn't be, like, more tight-fisted about everything. Like, all the conference rooms, you know, had the paper over the glass, and, you know, like, we don't want anyone to see.
We're working on the next stealth bomber.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. It was a total creative skunk works at every agency. Apparently, everyone is doing wildly important work. And so anyway, so it was just kind of this weird vibe, right? Like, everybody's like, you know. And then more recently, as we started working out of this co-working space, Access Salt Lake, where our studio lives, and we've started to get more into, like, business community and stuff. We found, like, a whole nother group of individuals who are just instantly willing to give of themselves. Like, it's not about the money, it's not about whatever, it's about building relationships and things like that. And for sort of my ethic and the things that are important to me, this idea of relationships is, like, the key thing. And so I found that all the things I thought about Salt Lake have switched, you know, kind of flipped around. And now I'm getting this vibe where everybody is just super cool and super chill. So I don't know if it was a rough night, if it's just the ad guys, I don't know what it is, but I've noticed in this creative community or in the developer community, because they hold a lot of events here at this space for developers, and then just
a weekly CSS entry level.
Yeah,
class.
they have, like, an HTML one too.
We'd like to get more here. So if you guys ever need a space for something like that,
yeah,
feel free to reach out.
So, but yeah, so it's really cool, and just watching all these creative people, you know, in the developer space, kind of giving of themselves and training people up on stuff it's really cool. I mean, you can get, you know, your full education just by attending all these meetups. So really cool. So
yeah,
you know, just to sort of put a point on what you're talking about, about this whole idea about the JS meetups and stuff like that. I think
it's crazy
really cool.
Because it seems like every time I've been there, there's been like 30, 40, 50 people there.
Yeah.
And it's quite a good turnout. It's neat to see. So props to the Utah JS guys, and props to you for being willing to do stuff like that. Let's talk more about you.
It's my least favorite time.
Well, you gave a really long introduction to him. Maybe it would be good to hear from you what it is you do.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm a software engineer, work at Amazon on Alexa. I've been there for 2 years.
Okay.
Prior to working at Amazon, I worked for 5 years at a local company here in Salt Lake called HireVue. At the end there, I was the director of engineering at about 50 engineers working there. Great place. Prior to that, I worked for about 8 or 9 years as a software engineer for in the like defense industry. So we were doing software for the U.S. government.
For Lockheed.
And Lockheed was one of them. Yeah, that was an interesting situation. I interviewed for a small company that got the job, and then between the time that I got the job offer and my first day, Lockheed Martin swooped in and bought that company. So,
Oh, really?
So yeah, I became a Lockheed Martin employee.
Like, I
funny.
wasn't signing up for this.
Yeah, you gotta love these guys with all that money.
Yeah, so then I only worked there for a short period of time. Then I went to work for another local company here in Salt Lake called Applied Signal Technology. Great little company. And then while I was there, Raytheon swooped in and bought them. I'm like a target for these giant.
Yeah, apparently you draw defense contractors.
Yeah, exactly. So I got out of there. I'm not really a big company guy, so
Yeah.
And here I am at Amazon, one of the biggest companies.
Yeah, the biggest.
So you graduated from BYU. How was their program as far as like the computer science program?
Yeah, so I did computer science. It was awesome.
Okay.
I loved it. So I started CS at BYU in the fall of 2000. And I had actually already done a year of mechanical engineering, which I absolutely hated.
Okay.
I thought, growing up, because I loved Legos, I thought that I would be a good mechanical engineer. And that would be
Building
my
bridges. And
Yeah. No, it turns out Legos have nothing to do with mechanical engineering. Surprise, surprise. So I just absolutely hated it. And the other crazy thing I told myself was, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer and not a computer programmer, because I just don't want to sit in front of a computer all day, right? Which is just the stupidest thing to say, because mechanical engineers, what do you think they do all
Sit
day?
in front of a
Sit in front of a computer all day.
Exactly. So this just tells you how stupid I was in career selection early on. So after a year of that, I dropped out of mechanical engineering and switched over to computer science. And I loved it so much that at one point, one of the semesters, I think I took like 5 CS classes or something, which is like unheard of. Like the counselors were like, look, you really should take no more than 3, and even 3 is kind of crazy.
You just were eating it up.
I was loving it. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
loving it. I mean, every spare minute I was working on this coursework, and everything was lab work. There's so much lab work and not a lot of exams, and that just really tickled my fancy. So I spent a lot of time in the lab, a lot of time writing code, and I graduated, I guess, calendar time from fall 2000 to summer of 2003. So I did the whole program in like less than 3 calendar years.
Wow.
Because I just ate it up. It was just really, I loved it.
Okay. So I graduated high school in 2000, and right about that time, I think it's at 96 that JavaScript released. I think it was.
It was around that time frame. It was in the 90s. Brendan Ike over at Netscape. Yeah, it was definitely in the 90s.
So your career spanning such a long time, you've seen pretty much the development of the current web system. That has to be interesting to kind of go back and look at what you were using to what's available now.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, just to give you an example, I worked on a couple of open source projects in 2002, and I made this little web application in PHP. And at that time, the conventional wisdom was, do not use JavaScript in your websites. And the reason was because,
It wasn't supported across all browsers.
yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
the code you write, it might not even run in some other browser, or maybe the users have JavaScript turned off, things like that. And so I wrote this website that every single click was a round trip to the server, no matter what you were doing. You want to expand a menu on the screen, boom, round trip to the server. There was no dynamic HTML. There was no DHTML was just barely coming on the scene. It was dynamic HTML. It was the idea that you could make changes client side without going back to the server, just right in the browser. So I built this entire website with PHP, no JavaScript at all. Now, fast forward like 15 years. Now people are building web applications where the server just renders like some static HTML or JavaScript, and all of the rendering is done with JavaScript. Like your server is just dumping JSON API data, and then all the code that actually renders your application is running in the browser. It's a complete reversal from where we were 15 years ago.
Well, isn't jQuery, wasn't it designed to help with the cross-browser support?
Yeah, so jQuery bridged that gap. What ended up happening was people were so afraid to use JavaScript in their applications because it was so different from browser to browser. Microsoft had their own proprietary stuff. Netscape had their own stuff. Mozilla and Phoenix was just coming on the scene. Phoenix, which turned into Firebird, which turned into Firefox, was coming onto the scene. Chrome didn't exist yet. So jQuery helped you have like a uniform API that you could code to, and then under the hood, it would take care of all these different browsers. And then suddenly, it just exploded, right? People started there was like thousands and thousands of jQuery plugins that would do everything under the sun, your date pickers, your drop downs, and all this crazy stuff. So now people could do it, and they felt confident about it. It even abstracted like the AJAX stuff where you want to go back to the server and get some data from the server. Even that was abstracted with jQuery, so people could confidently build these client-side web apps.
It's becoming a little more obsolete now that everyone supports JavaScript, right?
Yes, I mean, jQuery did its job, and it did its job so well that browsers even took some of the jQuery implementations and said, we want that to be part of the open API for all browsers to implement. And quite frankly, what really I think pushed that was more the dynamic from these big companies like Firefox and Chrome, who are saying we want an open standard for web browsers. So that companies like Microsoft, who had traditionally like created these proprietary non-open standards, I mean, they were more or less open and usable. It's like they were documented and things, but they weren't broadly implemented across all browsers. Now that has reversed, and instead, even Microsoft is 100% on board, with these open standards, and they participate in TC39 and web standards bodies. So it's completely different, the world from where it was. jQuery, of course, bridged that gap. It was a fundamental part, but you're right. Like jQuery A is less necessary because there's more open standards today, but also applications are being developed at a slightly higher level of abstraction. So like they're using frameworks like Angular and React and Ember and Vue and so on. And so they don't have to deal with like these lower level DOM, document object model, that's like the browser API. They don't have to deal with that to write an application anymore. So
yeah, it's pretty neat how you can just, search for a React plugin and get what you need and install it and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So we're probably over a lot of our listeners' heads.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm going too deep here. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. I can dumb this
problem.
down real fast. So let's talk a little bit about Alexa.
Okay.
Are you responsible for the evil laugh? So I think that's something.
They actually recorded my voice for the laugh. They were like, "You have a creepy laugh. Let's do that."
See, you guys didn't realize we had a celebrity in that.
No, not at all. No, I was not responsible for it. I was aware of it, but.
So you guys, the bit of Alexa you work on, right? I mean, do you or your team develop Alexa in its entirety, or is there like a narrow focus that your group works on?
Yeah, so I work on a very narrow focus. Right now I'm focusing on doing a better job of collecting customer feedback. So the thing we're working on, which will be pretty cool. So Alexa is a big organization. There's a lot of people who work on Alexa. And
I
so
can't even imagine programming something like that.
And where do you start, right?
Yeah.
Alexa is the culmination of decades of research and hardware development that is now capable of handling very, very challenging speech recognition challenges that, prior to Alexa and, prior to even just the last 4 or 5 years were just unfathomable. But, we have some very bright scientists who have a lot of experience in the natural language, spoken language domain, and they've just built something really amazing over the last, 5-6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, like, as a digital marketer, a lot of people, including a lot of really important or influential people like the Gary Vaynerchuks in the world, are big advocates for the new skills and things like that can be done on Alexa. Do you have, in your experience, anything that you could point to or talk about in the sort of digital marketing space? Like, the way people might use it. I think a lot of people, and I'm probably guilty of this to some extent, is, I look at it like Siri, right? And Siri... no offense for Siri, but she's horrible. And she can give me the weather. She can play a song after about 3 or 4 tries.
Oh no!
And it's rough. I have a hard time.
The biggest problem lately is doing your son's math homework with fractions. She returns.
Yeah, she always returns a decimal. And so if you're learning fractions, she's making cheating really difficult. And so
maybe that's a feature.
Yeah. So anyway, like, what I guess is the difference between like an Alexa versus something like this?
Something like
a Siri type platform, or maybe competitive platforms.
I don't know. Honestly, when it comes to like marketing and like feature comparisons and things, I'm just not really the guy.
That's not your world.
Yeah, it's not really my world. I'm more focused on the technical aspects of how we build things, and not so much on like how it gets marketed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So I'm the guy that's paranoid that everyone's listening to me through Siri.
Well, she is,
or through Alexa.
Laughing.
It's weird how she just suddenly starts talking to you.
And Siri starts just talking randomly. I don't know.
But is that a legitimate thing to be worried about?
I don't worry about that at all. And even more so, having seen how careful Amazon is with earning customer trust, it's a hugely important thing for us. And so, I don't work on any of that stuff directly, but the fact of the matter is, I don't worry about it one day.
Yeah. Okay, I might actually go and get one then.
Well, for the people I know that use the Alexa platform, it's pretty cool, and the device is cool, and she actually seems to have a little better handle on the language than Siri does. So I guess they focus a lot of energy on the sort of the natural language understanding, and that seems like a really cool technology.
So it boggles my mind that you can program a machine to listen to like people with accents or people with just speech impediments and still trying and get. That has to be just the biggest, craziest algorithm ever. You know, you said it's been around for like 5 years.
I think Alexa launched in the fall of 2014.
Okay. Interesting. That's fun. So let's you've been with Amazon for what, 3-4 years now?
2 years.
2 years. Okay. When you're jumping around from like working for Lockheed, working for Raytheon and HireVue and all these different companies, how long is the learning curve to go from job to job?
Oh yeah, good question. As a software engineer, it varies a lot from company to company. I mean, there have been companies where I started, and within the first, say, 2 or 3 days, I'm feeling pretty productive, like I can actually make contributions. But there are companies where after 3 months, I feel like I'm still not even able to make valuable contributions. So I think it depends a lot on how big like your company is in terms of like the responsibility the engineers have to know. Sometimes you come into a system and you're like, this is a massive system. I'm working on a small part of it, but I have to understand all these other parts just to make a contribution without breaking the rest of them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you show up on a startup, that maybe only has had a couple of engineers working on it for a number of months, it's just, the scope of things you have to know to become productive is much smaller. And so I've literally seen that span from like 2-3 days to 2-3 months.
Okay.
So what do you think in terms of like, if you're young, budding, computer scientist or engineer, like, what do you think about generalization versus specialization? Like, is there enough specialty work out there that you can just make a living by choosing the one language or the one system that you care the most about? Or do you really need to have a full understanding of many things just to even land a job these days?
Yeah, this is a topic of debate. And I have definitely seen, so I'll give you the most cop-out answer, but it has an interesting explanation, which is, I don't think it matters at all whether you generalize or specialize. And here's why I say that. The software engineering industry is so hot right now. There are just so many jobs and so much demand and not enough people to fill those jobs that it almost doesn't matter. Like if you've chosen to specialize in something, now obviously there's the edge case where you choose to specialize in some obsolete technology.
Sure.
And I certainly know people who are trapped in that world. Like, I know someone who specialized in, what's the platform? PeopleSoft.
Oh.
And it was like,
gets the one job every 3 years.
yeah, exactly. It's like this one engineer, like spent like 7 or 8 years working on PeopleSoft, and it was like their main focus. And now it's like, well, there's no one hiring PeopleSoft engineers, and all your other skills are basically obsolete. So that does happen on the periphery.
Yeah, those DOS engineers are struggling for work right now.
I'm like, I just want a DOS job. I'm like, come on, OS2 warp. It's like, anyway, so and yet we have COBOL engineers who are just making a killing, right? Like, because it's just such a high demand.
Well, because I guess part of it is maintaining old software, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of the cutting edge version. Of
exactly.
This.
So setting aside those edge cases where you've chosen to completely specialize in this one thing that's totally obsolete, setting those aside, like let's say you've decided to specialize in web front end with React, that's hot, you're going to be fine. Even if you've decided to specialize in web front end with a slightly obsolete technology like jQuery, and I don't mean to knock on jQuery, but something that's slightly older, no problem, right? Like you're going to be fine. You're going to
do the core fundamentals that you learn becoming an expert at jQuery or whatever, like does that help you in learning new technologies?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. Every time you learn a new programming language or a new technology, you are flexing your learning muscles, which I think are the most important muscles you have. The specific skills you learn about a certain technology are just not nearly as valuable as your ability to learn new things. So let me just back up a little bit and say, I said generalist versus specialist, like it doesn't really matter. Now, I've built my career on being a generalist who specializes in different stuff depending on what's in front of me. So like if you look over the course of the last 15 years, I've worked for the first few years in Java in the defense industry. Then I moved over to C++ in a different part of the defense industry, and then I moved over to Python and JavaScript in like the web SaaS company. And now I'm working on a spoken language system using a lot of Java technologies and a lot of new things that are even specific to Amazon you can't find anywhere else. So like I've built my career on being able to completely reboot the tools and technologies that I use over the course of, not a lot of time. Like I need to ramp up and be productive pretty quickly. And so, like, am I a generalist or a specialist? Like, I don't know. I actually don't even know how to answer that question.
Right.
Because I've worked in such a wide array of different areas, and every time I get into one of these areas, I have to become a specialist in that area. And then a few years later, I move on, and those skills are just totally gone. I don't even use them anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So in the field though, like, because you've done, I assume, some hiring and firing and stuff in this field, are employers open to on-the-job learning? Like, I mean, can you pick out somebody that, they came out of school with maybe, I don't know, kind of a full stack understanding or something, but there's a lot of back-end stuff maybe they don't have? Like, I mean, can you look at a potential engineer and say, okay, well, he's got the smarts to learn it and allow them to learn the technology? Because, I mean, obviously, before you were working on Alexa, you probably didn't spend a lot of time in that space. So somebody took a gamble on you.
That's exactly right. So in my opinion, the most successful technology companies are hiring for aptitude and the ability for people to learn their new technologies. And the least successful companies will hire for an exact laundry list of skills and experience that you have to come and be productive. Now, there are exceptions to that rule too, but generally, like in the mainstream, that's what you will find. And so I have always been fortunate enough to find companies who are willing to take a chance on me because they saw potential in learning the skills that they needed me to have to do the job.
So you didn't necessarily know everything you needed.
Exactly.
But they felt confident that you'd be able to learn it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and the reason I think that I say successful companies are willing to do that is because the technologies and things they're using today to run their business will not be the technologies and things they use to run their business in 3 or 4 years. And so they want to hire people who are willing to grow and change and learn new things with their evolving business needs, instead of just saying, look, I am a jQuery engineer, period. And if your business evolves and you don't need jQuery anymore and you want to bring in some other tool, that's not me, right? Like, I don't want those people at my company. Business is too malleable and requirements change too much to be able to have that kind of person.
Right.
But there are companies that do that. And I have certainly I've been turned down jobs because I lacked a certain level of experience. I'll give you an example. I won't name the company, but I went to apply for a job and they required USB development experience. So I needed experience developing USB device drivers for USB hardware. I did not have that experience. But I kind of ticked every other box on their checklist, but not that one. So they said, we're not making you this offer because you lack this USB experience. We're looking for someone with more USB experience.
So what goes into a USB driver? Is it just...
Well, you have to know the spec and the protocol, and you have to understand how USB actually works when you're talking from the host to the device and all that stuff. And the reason I know a little bit about USB and can say that is because my very next job that I took instead, they took a chance on me, and it turned out, just as a coincidence, I had to do a bunch of USB development for the USB.
Go figure, right?
Yeah, so I ramped up on USB, and I learned it and did a bunch of work, and we were very successful and built an awesome USB-based product. It was super cool. And so I took that as just a poignant example of a company who was unwilling to take the chance because they didn't know how to assess for aptitude. And instead they were like, well, that box isn't checked, so we're not going to hire you. Whereas this other company did, and we had a lot of success as a result.
Okay.
So then sorry, Mike, to catch up. So what do you think then, I mean, just as somebody who's done a lot of hiring, like I'm constantly going back to the person who's just coming out of school or whatever. And also, I guess I have a follow-up to this, but so what do you think about sort of traditional education, going to school, going to BYU, going through computer science, whatever it is, versus sort of non-traditional self-taught? It seems like there's a lot of gray area in
code camps and this
it seems like in technology specifically, maybe this doesn't work for doctors and lawyers, but for technology space, creative space, it seems like there's a lot of room.
Just wouldn't it be amazing though if there was like a doctor's boot camp? In 12 weeks,
in 12
we will take
weeks.
from nothing to surgeon.
Yeah,
taking out kidneys.
Yeah, neurosurgery, just 12 weeks.
Yeah, just. I have worked with people from so many different educational backgrounds. I've worked with English majors, psychology majors. I've worked with people who have no college education at all. I've worked with people who've never set foot in a high school. And all these people have been successful as software engineers. So when it comes right down to it, there are so many paths to success in this industry. And I think it goes back to a couple of facts. Number one, our industry is very hot right now. It's a great time to be an engineer. There's a lot of high value work that needs to be done that doesn't require a ton of formal training. And number two, it's one of those industries that has very low barrier to entry, right? So you can get into it, and there are jobs at every level of experience available to you right now. There are people at, you mentioned agencies earlier. agencies are a great way for budding young software engineers to break into the industry without formal training, because they are able to just work at this like higher, I use this term, higher level of abstraction, right? Like you don't have to know machine language or like USB device driver development to use your USB keyboard to build a web application or a website for an agency, right? Like it's great. And so those two things combine to mean that we have just so much educational diversity and diversity of backgrounds in this industry, and I think it's great. So should you go and get a formal degree? And I think the answer to that question depends a lot on what you have available to you and your timing. Like if you're a young 18-year-old kid looking to get into software engineering and you think that's what you want to do, I think a CS degree might be a great option for you. You know, you're going to meet a lot of very interesting people. You're going to rub shoulders with professors you'd otherwise not get to know. You're going to build a lot of stuff and get exposed to a very wide array of things, many of which you won't use in your professional career, but it'll at least give you a menu of things so you even know what's out there.
From, so if you do run into that one instance where you need to know that language or
exactly. You know, and I remember I'm sitting in this class in my CS program. It's about databases, and we're going into like fourth normal form normalization, not normal form. Anyway, some level of database normalization, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is fascinating. Probably won't really use this, but there are people in those classes who sit there and go, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. And then you have to ask yourself, would you ever get exposed to that concept if you didn't go to
if you had just learned in your basement using an online platform of some variety or something, maybe you wouldn't have got that.
Exactly, or only responding to the immediate needs of your employment at the moment, right? Like it's like, well, I learned jQuery. Why? Because I needed to put a calendar chooser on my company's website, right? And it's like, you know, no problem. So would you have gotten exposed to some of these other things? Probably not. You know, like in the CS program, we had to build a TCP/IP stack, which is like the operating system level networking interface out to the internet. Right? It's like, so we had to build that top to bottom. It was fascinating. Have I ever had to build a TCP/IP stack since then? No. Yeah. Because jQuery. jQuery has TCP/IP. No, I'm just kidding. That's built into every operating system you'll use. There are probably tens of people in the world who have ever implemented a production TCP/IP stack. But you know, did I love it? Yes, I thought it was absolutely thrilling to build. You know, we had to build our own web server. That was fascinating. We just did so many things in the CS program that I probably never would have done on my own. So if that's appealing to you, great. You know, and then the other track is if you want to get into like academics, then of course you have to go that route anyway. So do I think it's a great option for some people? Yes. Do I think the bootcamp option is a great option for some people? I also think that. Like if you came to me, you're 45, you've had a 20-year career in marketing or something, and you want to break into software engineering, am I going to tell you to go, like you said, spend 40 grand and do a 4-year degree? Probably not. That's not going to be like my top recommendation for you.
Right. So, but I guess the moral of the story is that it doesn't matter how you get your education, just get your education. And it's all based sort of individually, but it's not, I guess, so in the creative field, for example, you know, degrees carry some value, but like really your portfolio is where it's at. Like if you're a great designer, people will scoop you up even if you're not maybe the best educated.
That's absolutely true.
What kind of portfolio is someone who is trying to get into this field? What should they have when they come in for an interview? Like
for your first job, you're trying to break into.
Yeah, you're fresh out of school, you're trying to get into the business.
Yeah, so like if you've got a 4-year degree under your belt, that kind of is your portfolio, and you can talk about the projects that you worked on during those 4 years, especially if you did like a senior capstone kind of project or something. That'll probably be the highlight of the interview for me. Like I will want to go into depth on that. Otherwise, though, if you're coming in without that kind of background, say you did a boot camp, again, it's going to be project based. And what I found is that there are companies who are willing to take that risk on hiring. Now, every hire involves a level of risk, right? But when you are hiring someone who only has 12 weeks of development training under their belt, you're taking a significant risk.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you hire someone who has 4 years of training under their belt, you're taking a less, I would say it's a lower risk, or at least the nature of the risk is different. So I'm going to want to see something you can show me that you can talk about, so I can get a sense for like, how much do you understand this stuff? Are you going to be productive when you come and join me? And do the tasks that I need this hire to do align well with the things that you've now been trained to do? And your training is actually pretty limited, so I can know that pretty quickly. And this is a case where, like, if you come into my company and it's like, we need a back-end developer who knows relational databases or something, you just finished a front-end boot camp.
Yeah, you know nothing.
You're probably not the right hire for me unless I have the time to ramp you up and the mentorship available to ramp you up. So, to answer your question, portfolio-wise, people talk about like GitHub and they're like, yeah, oh yeah, I want to see a lot of GitHub projects and stuff. Frankly, when I'm hiring people, I don't have time to like read all your code on GitHub. You know, like maybe you've written 1,000 lines of code. You know, that's going to take me hours.
You know,
to digest.
For me, it's funny because there's other Git repositories other than GitHub, and my buddy's trying to get me to switch over to one, and I'm like, no, I don't want to lose all my green dots.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But
Oh man,
that's funny. Okay, so I'm sorry, that threw me. The GitHub thing just threw me off of the question I was thinking. Oh, okay. So coming from like you're a senior software engineer, and then you come into HireVue, and now you're in charge of 40 people.
yeah.
How did that change your job?
It completely changed my job.
Okay.
100%. I mean, it was so different. So, you know, my whole career has been kind of this like sawtooth function, pulling me toward leadership, and then me taking like an action to go away from that, right? Like stop.
My good friend just did that. He's like, no, this isn't for me.
Yeah, he's like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been the case for me from like even in the first year. I don't know what it is. I'm kind of outgoing. I'm social, and I think management, you know, they misinterpret that as, you know, you're going to be a good software engineer. Right?
Well, that's probably it, right? I mean, not to be too stereotypical, but a lot of these guys probably aren't as outgoing and gregarious.
It is a stereotype in the industry. And one of my favorite stereotype jokes, which doesn't really hold, frankly. Like I said, there are so many people in the industry now who just don't meet this mold. But one of my favorite jokes is, how can you tell an extroverted software engineer from an introverted software engineer? And the answer is, an extroverted software engineer looks at your shoes when they're talking to you instead of their own shoes.
That's funny.
Well, I think we're getting into a new generation of these developers and stuff. I think a lot of those stereotypes were born in the early era of these technologies being developed.
Well, when they had to go and learn how to write their own language to do what they needed to do.
Well, yeah, it took an yeah.
Well, yeah, there wasn't this infrastructure. There were no boot camps. I mean, these people who were successful in the 80s as software engineers were people who literally spent their whole like youth on their Apple II computers in the basement. You know, the Steve Wozniaks of the world.
Yeah.
And whatnot. Anyway, setting that aside, because that stereotype is basically dead. You know, 95% of the people in the industry are nothing like that. But anyway, so long story short, at HireVue, a couple of years into that job, there was a need for a leader to come into the team. We had lost a higher level leader in the organization, and he left a big void, and there was no one to fill it. Hiring was going to take some time, so I volunteered. I said, look, I love this team. I want them to be successful. We're running without a leader right now. If you need me to do this, I will do this. And so my CTO said, all right, we'll do it. We'll put you in place. So, my thought was I was just going to be a manager, have a few, people reporting to me. Next thing I know, he said, you're the director of engineering. Which means I was responsible for hiring, firing, budgets, organization, organizing the teams.
Well, so is part of then what you found that you don't like about it as much is that it takes you out of doing the job? Well,
so this was now at a point in my career where I was actually open to it. So all the previous times when this had happened to me, I had said, okay, I'm going to do this for a little while. Okay, this sucks. I'm going to go back to writing code day to day and having a good time. But at this point now, I had been doing that for about a decade, and I thought to myself, it's time. I'm going to do this. So this time I stepped in willingly, eyes wide open, and I loved it. It was amazing. I spent 2 years doing that role at HireVue. The things I learned during those 2 years were just so valuable about how people work, the challenges people have in their lives that you just don't see day to day when you're an individual contributor. You don't know about the team dynamics. You don't know about the performance issues. Helping coaching people in their careers that you just don't really see. You'll see that with your manager maybe, but you don't know what your coworkers are going through and the kind of career goals they have and development that they're looking to get. Suddenly, when you have that full universe open to your eyes, you realize there's a whole other world here that I just didn't even know existed. I lived in this world, but I couldn't see this world.
Right.
So I absolutely loved it. And frankly, I would still be doing that job if Amazon hadn't come along and just presented me this opportunity to do something amazing and different.
Yeah, so, that's awesome.
So you did that for 2 years. Is there anything that stood out in those 2 years that like a certain experience that being a manager versus being just a regular, 9-to-5 employee that just, I don't know, like working with someone where you can see their development and coach them and build them up and just be that mentor that you couldn't have been otherwise. That's got to be something that being in that role and being able to extend a hand to someone who needs it. It has to be a rewarding experience. Were there very many of those? Was it like just a very rewarding job in general?
That's a very good question. And the answer from my experience is that being a manager is much less obviously rewarding than being an individual contributor. As an individual contributor, you have these milestones that are concrete and clear. It's like you have a goal, you ship some product, and you can all celebrate, right? Like, maybe we'll bring in food and we'll have a party, or like we had a launch party, right? When was the last time you saw like a launch party equivalent for a manager who did a good job coaching someone?
Never.
Like, you never see that, right?
The recognition is never there.
Yeah, so it's a little bit thankless. The individuals, I think, in some cases are very grateful, and that feels good. But one of the things that I struggled with as a manager, and I think many managers struggle with this, is that you have to be okay with the fact that there's no like event or milestones that are obvious, or they're very rare. It's kind of like being a parent, right?
Yeah.
Like, the kids never say thank you to you. And you get these occasional rare milestones where you go, oh, okay, my kid's turning out okay, right? Or my kid's turning out very poorly, right? These are both common milestones you get as a parent. They're uncommon. And I think being a manager is a lot like that. And I don't mean to say that I felt like I was shepherding a bunch of children. That's not at all what I mean to say. I just mean that the recognition is infrequent and not very concrete. There are occasional moments where you say, okay, this person is going through a really serious personal problem, and I'm helping coach them through their work-life component of that problem. And then, you can look forward a few months later and go, oh, hey, yeah, I think they worked through that. They're back to full productivity or whatever. That happens, but like I said, those moments are just fleeting and pretty infrequent.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest thing that my eyes were open to, is just how hard it is to be a manager in that way.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, especially being in charge of some, like 40 plus employees. I think my buddy had like 10 on his team.
Yeah.
And just that many, and trying to juggle everything that's going on in a big project and their specific roles, and following their work, and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and then making sure that they're not overextending themselves, the work-life balance aspect of it. And then it's got to be stressful.
It is. So, it's only stressful if you care, like if you deeply care about it.
If you just want the product out and you don't care about your employees, and
easy.
Then it's no trouble. So I wondered, so this is a problem that happens a lot in the creative field, or advertising field specifically, something that happens to me, and I'm sure it happens to you guys too. I wanted to talk to you about, how do you keep up with the industry? Mm-hmm. So, things are obviously evolving and changing very rapidly in technology all the time. And as you mentioned earlier, maybe every 3 to 4 years, these companies have to audible and do different things. How do you as an individual keep up on what's happening in the industry versus getting sort of caught in your silo?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's a risk to any software engineer over time, like we were talking about before, like this PeopleSoft situation, right? Like, you just kind of miss the boat, right? Some industry trend comes up and boom, you're gone, right? I honestly don't know how, I don't have a formula or a recipe for doing this, but I think that a big helpful component to that is being social with people who are not your immediate coworkers. Your coworkers are caught in the same silo you're caught in, right? So going to meetups, going to conferences, getting on Twitter and following people who are leaders in certain industries, but even that has a silo problem, because you follow the wrong
sort of self-selecting group of people.
Exactly. And every once in a while, maybe every year or two, I will say, okay, who are my Twitter followers? What are the industry terms I hear? Because sometimes you'll hear a little cross-pollination on Twitter, even if your particular set of people you follow aren't, they're focused on this one area. Sometimes they'll mention something or drop a hint here and there. And so I'll be like, okay, what are some of the interesting trends I've kind of caught almost subconsciously, and it's like recently Kubernetes was kind of a big trend, Docker containers. Those are, over the last 4 or 5 years, those have kind of taken off. So find out who are some of the key people at the front of that industry or in some of those trends. Look for the projects, open source or otherwise, and follow those people. Whether they blog, whether there's some company whose news you want to subscribe to, whether there's people who tweet. Those are good mechanisms. Another thing I recently discovered is this Google feature. I think it's called Google Alerts or something. Mm-hmm. It basically lets you put in a search term, and anytime there's new content on the internet that matches that search term, they'll email you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's kind of a cool way to stay abreast of things. So I put in a search term. I recently heard about this new development in AI from this researcher, the guy who founded Palm Pilot back in the day. He's apparently been doing a bunch of research on neuroscience and other things. And I'm like, okay, so I put his name in the Google search or Google alert system, and I get these emails occasionally. He published a paper or whatever, and I want to go check up on it, things like that. So those are just some of the things I do. But just kind of being social and breaking out of your box and making sure you're not talking to the same 5 people every day is an important way, I think.
Well, and I don't know if this is a trend in technology, and I'm sure you have an answer for this, but so one of the things that crept into, or seems to have crept in over the last maybe 10 years or so in advertising, people have gone from sticking with an agency for a long time to jumping ship every couple of years.
Yeah.
I think part of that is this rapid influx of new technologies and new marketing and delivering, content delivery channels and all this stuff. The only way to learn is by getting into a new shop that's doing the new thing, or,
Yeah, for sure.
whatever it is. Do you find that, and you sort of described this a little bit in your process earlier, that every position you jumped to, you were, onboarding or learning a new technology.
Absolutely.
So is this becoming a problem with retention, in that people aren't sticking with companies that long? They're staying while that technology is hot, and then they jump to the next hot technology.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm absolutely seeing that in the software engineering industry. When I changed from when I joined HireVue, I had been at my previous company for 7 years, and I didn't realize that was a long time. And when I started, people were like, "Oh, where'd you come from?" I told them, "How long were you there?" 7 years. Their jaws, their jaws hit the floor, and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think 7 years. I was working with people who had been there for 20 years."
Right.
And their jaws hit the floor. They're like, "I've never been in a company longer than 20 months." I'm like, wow. So it's absolutely a problem. But you know what? It's a super good thing for engineers right now to change jobs every couple of years, and I'll tell you why. There's 2 reasons. You hit the nail on the head with the first one, which is it forces you to become an expert in a new set of technologies. So instantly, you're flexing those learning muscles, and you're getting exposed to a new set of ideas. There's no better way than making sure you're not talking to the same 5 people than changing companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely works. And the second thing is the actual reason I think people are doing this is because they tend to get big raises when they do that.
That's I heard that. I heard when you get your first job, you work there for about a year and a half. Then once you have the 2 years experience, then you can go and get a significant raise.
Yeah, this was my story as well. Right out of school, I worked there for 18 months, changed jobs, got a 20% raise. I'm like, they never would have given me a 20% raise. It would have taken 5 years to do that, probably. And that's what people are seeing. And I think that happens because for a couple of reasons right now. The first one is people get a lot of experience. You spend 2 years at a company, and suddenly you are worth more, demonstrably worth more to other companies than you were before you were at that company.
Right.
So that's one reason. But the other reason is there's a lot of investment money floating around right now in the industry, and that's been true for the last 10 years or so, maybe 8 to 10 years. So money is cheaper. It's almost like there's a salary inflation situation going on because there's so many investors pouring money into VC right now. And I know we've probably heard stories about that slowing down and speeding up, but I can't sense that it's slowing down at all from a salary perspective. And so VCs are willing to pour money into companies, and then companies have more discretionary capital to invest in
the best and brightest or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so that explains how it's good for employees. How about for employers? Is there any benefit to an employer? I mean, obviously they're paying more for their people. Does that mean they're better qualified, better people? Or I mean, or does it suck to lose part of your workforce every 2 years? Like, I mean, how is there a benefit to employers in all this? I
think paying more for an employee compared to another employee, there is basically no way to know whether that money is better spent objectively and empirically. And I used to think that retention was an important component of running a team. And I still do think it's true, like to a certain degree. If you're churning employees every 6 months, then you're just treading water, right? Like they'll never get fully ramped up and be able to make productive contributions to the team. But if you're churning employees out every 3 or 4 years, and I know even that's longer than the time span we were just talking about,
right? I
actually think that can be a good thing. Because what happens is you get new people who come in with fresh ideas.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
And this has happened to me myself. Like at my last company, I'd been there for 5 years, and I had a hard time coming up with new ideas. Because every time I thought of a new idea, I could think of the 10 reasons why that wouldn't work because I had all this baggage.
The platform,
yeah. I know all the weaknesses of the platform. So I know all the challenges.
Almost holding yourself back from making good or new choices or refreshing choices.
That's exactly right.
It works.
That's exactly right. And you talk to these young entrepreneurs who start companies, right? They come in, they're fresh, bright-eyed, and bushy-tailed, ready to do something stupid, and they do, right? And then 4 years later, you ask them, like, would you do this again?
Heck no.
They all say no.
Yeah.
Right? So what happened? Well, they got jaded. right? Because
Right.
they had real life experience. And so you need this fresh blood, I think, in an organization. And you can get that by having people leave, but you can also get that by growing, which I think is actually a more common approach. You get new ideas by just expanding your team rather than laying off people or having natural attrition happen.
Mhm.
So I think it is good for companies to have new life come into them.
Okay, let's switch gears here and talk about your podcast.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a big fan. I've started listening to it. I've only known about you for about 3 weeks now,
Okay.
so I need to go back and listen to some of the back catalog. But your podcast is called Soft Skills. You can find it at softskillsaudio.audio,
Mhm.
and you guys talk about everything. Like I think the last episode you took some questions from some of your listeners, and one of them was like how to be polite on a Slack channel, you know? and then not be the idiot. So let's talk about the podcast, how long it's been around. I
Yeah,
think,
how did that come about? Why did you decide podcast was
Yeah.
the channel for you?
Yeah, great question. So we're in our 3rd year now. Show is Soft Skills Engineering. If you search Soft Skills Engineering on your podcast app, you'll find us. And it came about because my co-host, Jameson Dance, who is a seasoned engineer, he's actually a manager now at Walmart Labs. He runs a team within Walmart Labs that does some really cool internal software that's used by Walmart retail. And what happened was he came to me with basically he wanted some advice. He was in a tricky situation at work, and he said, Dave, I just want to get your opinion on how I should navigate this. And so I was like, okay, I asked him some questions, gave him some answers, and he's like, that was really good. He goes, how come we don't have like an outlet for asking these kinds of questions and getting answers in our industry? Like we're so focused on technical questions and answers. We have things like Stack Overflow.
yeah, I was just going to throw that out there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we've had mailing lists and forums forever. And how come there's not like a place to go where you can ask these like not technical questions? And I was like, yeah. He says, maybe we should start a podcast where you and I answer people's questions. I'm like, that sounds pretty arrogant.
Dude, it was so weird when we first did ours. It was just like, do we really want to do that? I think we talked about it for a year and a half before we actually pulled the trigger.
Yeah. So we pulled the trigger pretty quick. We said, you know what? Let's just see if there's an appetite for this out in the industry. So we just slapped together a recording really quick. You can see it still. It's our first episode. Threw it up on the internet. I didn't even make a website. We just put out the podcast just to see what would happen. And sure enough, people started listening, and we got a lot of positive feedback on it. And I thought to myself, okay, there's probably about 20 episodes worth of soft skills questions out there, and then we'll have to just shut this thing down. So now we've done 130 episodes, and our question back, we have over 100 questions in our question backlog.
Wow.
So it's just like people just keep coming up with questions that are just super interesting situations at work that I'm like, oh, wow, that is fascinating. So Jameson and I, we do 2 questions every week where people write in, we answer the question, and it's everything from like, how do I get a good raise? How do I get into management? Should I quit my job? That's a very common question. Should I quit my job? How do I deal with it? Like literally, we got this question this week. I have a coworker, we sit near each other, and he has very stinky feet. How do I deal with that? And
great.
the beauty of the podcast is Jameson is hilarious. So he has just some of the funniest ideas for people to do. And then once in a while, we give a serious answer where you're like, okay, this might actually be beneficial.
That's great. Can you talk about how having a podcast has changed your life and maybe the benefits of podcasting for business? We actually have a seminar coming up that we're going to be talking about that. So I want to steal your input.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I feel like the podcasting industry has a really long tail effect, where you have kind of the podcasting giants, like all these NPR shows and This American Life. They kind of pioneered the whole, podcasting industry as a thing. And then you have just like a million shows in this long tail that have tiny audiences and are hard to, frankly, they're hard to find.
Yeah.
Right. We're in that long tail for sure. I think we're up a little bit closer to the tall section of that long tail, but like we're not at the end of the long tail. And so the reality is like there's not obvious direct money in podcasting, except for these big shots who can get underwear and mattress companies to advertise on them like nonstop. It's just like nonstop underwear ads. Anyway, if I had a nickel for every podcaster who told me to buy a mattress, I would have a lot.
MeUndies.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, I want sponsored for that if you hear that.
Yeah, if you.
Yeah, we love underwear around here. We both wear it. It's all good, So I mean, if anybody, I actually did an underwear challenge and I landed on MeUndies. MeUndies.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I bought maybe 30 brands, different price points,
Wow, you're serious?
up to $100 a pair.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
I went hog wild on finding underwear, and I found the right ones, and they're MeUndies.
How did the $100 underwear compare to like the cheaper stuff?
They're horrible. I actually don't like them at all. They have a weird cut. The material is nice, but that's it.
Is it made of like gold leaf or something?
Yeah, it was probably made more expensive by some sort of tactile something. It's
like
made
an
out of
artisan in
yak
Portland
wool
or
or
something.
something. Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I was not impressed. It was strictly a money play, I think.
Okay.
So they've convinced people that there's value in their brand.
All right.
But if they'd like to sponsor us too, that's fine.
We'll edit all that
Yeah,
out.
we love them too. But
do anything for your money.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah, but for my dollar, it's MeUndies. MeUndies.com. Hashtag MeUndies. For sponsorship opportunities, info at xcast.com. So, somebody, tweet us.
That's hilarious.
So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it hasn't really changed our life that much. Other than, I will say, so we aren't getting rich off of it. We do. It does take an hour or two a week, so we have less free time. And I will tell you this one. It's actually a little embarrassing to say, but there is one way that it has changed my life, and that is when I go, and Jameson has the same thing happen to him. When we go to tech conferences, people who we don't know come up to us and say, "Hey, I listened to your show,"
Isn't that the
and
weirdest thing?
it is weird.
It's so weird.
It's fun, and once in a while they'll want to take a selfie with me, and I'm just like, wow, this is not what I had in mind when I started.
Yeah, I was going to have you sign our console before you leave.
Oh,
but,
God.
No big deal. So
that's like the one way that our life is different.
That's cool. Well, and you're in a little bit different situation too. Like maybe, because you don't necessarily have a business of your own or something that you're trying to push or generate new work through this.
Exactly.
It's really kind of almost a philanthropic effort. You're trying to help people out.
This is a labor of love. I mean, this is just us saying, hey, there's a gap here in the industry. Let's see if we can fill that gap with something fun.
Does your spouse or significant other accuse you of this being a hobby all the time and that it's not worth your time and you should stop doing it because it doesn't generate income?
Hashtag Brian's wife.
Yeah, that was a very specific question.
Yes. That was very specific.
She doesn't listen to the show, though, so we're all good.
My wife also does not listen to our show. No, my wife's super supportive. And actually, I've enlisted the help of my 2 teenage daughters for doing audio editing, so she really loves it, and they make a little bit of side money that way, and they're learning valuable technical skills.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, my oldest son, my now 12-year-old, he just turned 12, is starting to learn Photoshop and an iMovie for editing. So he's starting to get an idea for linear editing and all that stuff.
YouTube channel in the making.
Oh yeah, well he's got one. Photoshop Boy 375 or
Isn't
something
it amazing
like that.
that 12-year-olds have YouTube channels?
Yeah, right.
What is this?
I didn't even
live
have a
in?
phone back then. Phones weren't even around.
Yeah,
I know.
So.
Yeah, well, and my youngest is a performer, so he's all about it. He goes around every time he's doing anything. He will just sort of announce, "Hey, welcome back to my show. I'm doing this." Like camera or no camera, whatever. It doesn't matter what he's doing.
I set up the podcast in his front room once and let him. If you listen to the early
Yeah, maybe the
episodes,
first 10 or 12 episodes.
it's actually him saying, "Get all the eggs," and I scratched it on the turntable.
Nice.
And stuff. It was kind of fun, but I think we sparked a fire in him on that.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
yeah, no. Well, and it's funny because like some of the biggest YouTube guys, like there's this channel, and I don't even know the name of the channel. I just know the critter on the channel is this kid named Ryan, and he reviews toys. He does toy reviews and stuff like that. But he's like number 1 or 2, like of all of them, and he's like now probably 7 or 8.
That kid probably makes more money per year than I will ever make in my life.
Probably makes
Well,
more money.
well, and what's nuts is like his competition is like Dude Perfect, and they look like ESPN, like they fully produced, fully everything, and they're like maybe beating him, maybe.
Yeah, this kid shows up with an iPhone.
Yeah,
probably isn't even his.
Yeah, his dad rigged up his MacBook Pro, and he's working on the FaceTime camera or something.
Amazing.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So, well, that's cool. I mean, I think for us, podcasting's been pretty rewarding. We don't do probably as much goodwill as you guys do. We haven't been doing as many things.
I think our subject matter, we like to pull out the eggs of people's careers and pass that along to other people.
Yeah.
I might not be the person passing the greatest information along, but I hope our guests are.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're putting all the heavy lifting on our guests because
Yeah.
we can't be held accountable for this stuff. So, but you said you're 130 episodes in.
Yep.
How often do you guys publish?
Every week.
Every week?
Every Monday morning is a new episode.
Awesome.
About how long into it before you started getting those people saying, "Hey, can I get a selfie? Can I?" We're seeing like an exponential growth. It seems like every week it's getting more traction and more
Yeah.
traction. He got an email the other day from someone that was shocked that he actually replied to him because they thought we were that big.
Oh yeah.
And to us, it's like, oh,
You're the only guy that emailed us.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I responded to him in 5 minutes. Like, I don't know how to spread it out. Like, oh my God, an email.
So, but I mean, like, did you see like a significant growth after, a year or after the second year?
Nope. It's I got to tell you, it's just been slow and steady. Every week it's a little bit more. We have months that go up and months that go down. Right now, we're definitely seeing more growth. A lot more people have been listening than last year. And I was just kind of looking at some of these statistics. They have these statistics online you can look at, and I think we're at like 80% year-over-year growth. So like a good early stage startup.
Yeah,
like,
right.
But we're not seeing any of this hockey stick business where it's like,
all of a sudden taking off.
Yeah, we had 10 listeners yesterday and we have 1 million listeners the next day. That's just not really, I don't think that's how podcasting tends to work.
Yeah.
I think it tends to be more slow growth.
You develop your fan base and they kind of tell their friends until
I think so.
slowly grows.
Yeah. Well, and what, I guess to sort of wrap up, I think we're starting to get near the end here.
We're getting there.
What are sort of the long-term plans for the website? Like, I mean, do you hope to turn it into something bigger and better, or is your intention to just kind of keep this QA session, maybe bring on other engineers, or what do you think?
We are terrible planners. We're not visionary. We have no view into the future. We just kind of take it, 1 week at a time. And Jameson and I just love talking to each other. We have great chemistry. I love hearing his advice to people, and I make a really good laugh track. So basically, he tells the jokes and I make the laugh sounds, and it's great. And so, I don't know. Like in 5 years, I don't even know if we'll still be doing it, probably. But I have no plan. We don't plan like that. We just want to do what we think is best for people in the moment. And right now, we feel like there's a big need for people, especially considering how many people have come into this industry over the last 4 or 5 years who just don't know. They're like, where do I go? How do I do this? I think they need a place to go to ask these kinds of questions. And so we're just happy to fill that role for as long as we can.
Yeah, and I think with sort of this, rapidly evolving landscape and technologies that change, it seems like week to week, or the next hot thing or whatever coming along all the time, I think it is important for people to have places to go.
I appreciate you saying that, but we try to transcend that. Like we try to avoid like hot button technology topics and things like that. We try to go with things that are classic, things that are timeless. And when I listen to the Stinky Feet problem is not getting solved by jQuery, right? So I look back, I listened to episodes from a couple of years ago, and I say, you know what, this is just as relevant today as it was 2 years ago, even though the technology landscape is turned upside down between now and then.
Yeah. I love what you're doing. Thank you for making the time to come in. And
thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's awesome talking to you.
Yeah, sorry
early
for
morning pod,
the YouTube stream fiasco. And
it was barely a fiasco.
I'm going to leave it in just because it was funny.
No, we're pulling back the veil. We're showing people what goes on with
sausage making.
Yeah, that's right. It's such a high impact production. I think it's really important people see what's going on. So,
so once again, you can find Dave Smith's podcast at softskills.audio. He also has a blog at medium.com /@DJ Smith.
That's right.
42.
DJ Smith 42.
Yeah. DJ Smith over here.
Smith 42.
Are you really? Oh, DJ.
I've been a DJ for 20 years.
Luckily, he doesn't go by DJ Smith. That's a pretty generic DJ name.
I think I'm going to change my name.
So cool. Well, yeah, no, thanks a bunch, Dave. Anything else you want to get out of here on, parting shots, or anywhere else people can find you if you care to be found?
Oh yeah, sure. Hit me up on Twitter. I do tweet occasionally, and my Twitter handle is DJ Smith 42. You can find the show Soft Skills Engineering on Twitter as well at Soft Skills ENG. Follow us there. We tweet every episode, so you can kind of stay abreast of the episodes that are coming out if you want to selectively grab.
And set up a Google alert if you want.
You can, yes.
There you go.
You can. Although I will say, if you set up a Google alert for Soft Skills Engineering, you will get many false positives.
So cool. All right. Well, with that, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for those tuned in on the live stream, and everybody have an awesome week. We'll see you next time.